Hello and welcome to Stones Keep's Gospel Scholars series. This video is about Gideon, and I would like to share some insights and some things that I experienced with this gospel story. Now, for context, I feel like I need to fill you in on something that was going on at the time that I had this experience with the story of Gideon. So, at this time, our family was going through a financial struggle that was huge, and we were at our wits' end as to what to do, but we felt that we had been given some inspiration that we needed to sell our house. And it was hard to really wrap our minds around that. That wasn't how we wanted this to turn out, but we felt in our hearts that that's what we should do. So emotionally and spiritually, I was exhausted, and I didn't want to make any more decisions. And at this point, it was a Monday night, and I found myself home with one of my teenage sons. Everybody else was gone to work, and so I didn't have the energy to really think about what we would do for a family home evening lesson. So I suggested to him, why don't we watch a church video? And I left it up to him to go and pick a video from off of our shelf. To my surprise, he chose a VeggieTales video. I thought this was strange because he was 17 or 18, and I didn't think that that's what he would pick. But he showed me the video, and it was still in the factory wrapping. And so obviously we had never watched it. And the video was entitled Gideon, Mighty Man of Valor. And as I thought about it, I didn't even know what Gideon's story was all about. So I figured, all right, let's watch the video. Let's see what this video has to say about the story of Gideon. So if you would like to follow along in your scriptures and check out the story actually in the Bible, you will find this story in Judges 6, and we begin in about verse 5, where it explains that the Midianites were this ferocious people that just invaded, and they were like grasshoppers. They just were a multitude of people that just came in, and they just seemed like they were without number. It was such a large invasion, and they took pretty much everything that they wanted. And so the Israelites were greatly impoverished because of the Midianites, and they were crying to the Lord for help. And so here we find Gideon in secret threshing grain because he doesn't want the Midianites to know that he has anything worth having, because they would take it. And as he's threshing this grain, an angel of the Lord comes over and has a little talk with Gideon, and he addresses him in a very favorable manner. He says, the Lord is with thee, thou mighty man of valor. Now, Gideon is a little taken back by this angel, and even more so when the angel tells Gideon that the Lord has a work for him to do. Now, one of the things that struck me the most is that when this angel appeared to Gideon, he addressed him as a mighty man of valor. But Gideon wasn't an army general. He was just a regular guy. And in the beginning of this story, he's not really what you would describe as a mighty man of valor. And when the angel explains to Gideon that the Lord wants him to raise up an army and go up against the Midianites, he just is not really on board with this whole idea. He, in fact, says to the angel, I'm just a lowly person. My family's poor. I'm from the small tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. And the Lord wants me to raise up an army against so great a foe as the Midianites. And he just didn't have faith that that could happen. So when the angel was insisting that he was supposed to do this work and that he was from God, Gideon wanted a sign that this was for real. And I don't know why the Lord put up with this next little bit in the story with all of Gideon's testing to see if the angel really was from the Lord, because the angel really has to jump through a lot of hoops to convince Gideon that he really was a messenger from the Lord. So Gideon says to him, when I put this fleece on the ground, and in the morning when I get up, if the fleece is wet and the ground is dry, then for sure I will know that you are a messenger from God. And sure enough, when Gideon gets up in the morning, the fleece is wet and he can actually wring dew out of this fleece, and the ground was all dry all around the fleece. And Gideon's like, wait a minute. Don't get mad at me, but can we go ahead and have another test? So this time I want the fleece to be dry and the ground to be wet. And we'll see then. If then I will have to admit that you are a messenger from the Lord. So just as Gideon had requested, when he gets up in the morning, now the fleece is dry and the ground is wet. So now he has to admit that this was indeed a messenger from God and that God had called him to a great work. So Gideon gets on board with gathering an army, and he goes and finds a whole bunch of men. And then when we get into Judges 7, chapter 7, there it explains that the Lord is not satisfied with Gideon's army, and he says actually that his army is too big. And so Gideon's army is slowly whittled down until Gideon only has just a few men. And the Lord is doing this to have Gideon be clearly understanding that the Lord is the one who is going to defeat the Midianites. It's not going to be through the arm of flesh and the strength of men that this great task is going to happen. It will happen because the Lord makes it happen. And so Gideon and his 300 men get ready to go up against this huge Midianite army. Now, keep in mind that the Midianite army, they're trained soldiers, and the Israelites were not trained soldiers. These were just men that were part of the Israelites, and maybe some of them had some military training, but they are not seasoned soldiers like these Midianites, and the Midianites are fierce and a multitude of men. And the night before they're going to have the battle and go up against the Midianites, our friend Gideon goes over to a cliff and he overhears some Midianite guards talking to one another, and he loses heart. He's sitting there looking at this encampment that is probably miles of people, and he's looking at what they're about to do, and logic would say this is crazy, we shouldn't be doing this, but he is sitting there and he loses faith and he says, I can't do it. And then Gideon's little angel friend says to him, but Gideon, you're not going to defeat the Midianite army. God's going to do it. That your job is to believe, like a ton of bricks. I realized in that moment that in my own situation, my own battle that I was going up against, that I was trying to take on the role of the Lord in deciding on how this should go, and that my job was actually to believe and trust the Lord that He had my back and that He would take care of this situation. What the Lord was wanting was my heart. And I realized in that moment that I needed to change my heart. I also realized that the simplest thing in the world for God to do was to take care of my problem. What he was really working at and what he was really trying to accomplish was to get me to trust and believe him that he would do that. Now, I had lots of faith that he would do that for other people, and I didn't question that at all when it came to other people's challenges and problems. But for my own problems, that's where my faith was a little bit weaker. And I realized that I needed to change my thinking and that I needed to believe and trust the Lord. Did I believe in the Lord, or did I believe the Lord? There's a difference between those two things. And I think I was believing in God, and I wasn't necessarily believing his words to me in Revelation and trusting that I could trust him and that he would take care of the situation. Now, there is a part 2 to this story, and that's going to be a second video because it isn't specifically about Gideon, though it goes hand in hand with the story of Gideon. It's actually a story about George Mueller. So if you'd like to hear about the miracle that happened because I changed my heart and I believed the Lord, and then the second part to the story happened, you will want to watch the video about George Mueller, and I will link it down below.